the objective still remains the same. Our goal is to provide conceptual mappings and guidance and best practices to support CETUS SDTM to OMOP conversion. As you guys remember, last time we spoke about this, the major challenge has been access to real-world clinical trial data, which we've managed to accomplish via Vivly and some other avenues as well, but Vivly is our predominant main source of real-world clinical trial data. So I think we can easily achieve the first key result there by using at least equal to 3 or greater real-world SDTM studies. And we're slightly pivoting from what we originally had last year, which was more geared to executing some of these mappings at a value level perspective and leveraging all the terminology that would exist in some of these real world studies. What we've learned is that we have limited access to the environment of Vivly to be able to do some of this work. And, for example, we have 3 people on our team that have access, and getting the tooling into the actual environment, installing that, getting it set up, and having other participants not being able to actively work within the environment has been a challenge in itself, but we're working around those parameters by pivoting our strategy to doing the conceptual mapping. So that means staying kind of above the waterline, but also doing periodic testing of some of the terminology, but not to the full extent that we had originally planned. So key result number 3 is essentially a draft SDTM to OMOP guidance, targeting Q1 2024, at least for that. Since the rest of this year we'll be doing some of those conceptual mappings and drafting some of the topics and best practices. I think at the end of the day, the deliverable will be a starting point for industry to leverage SDTM to OMOP, but we can acknowledge that it's a continuous journey. We'll get feedback from those that do actually implement it within their organizations and update and accommodate those back into this guidance and mappings accordingly. So I think if you go to the last slide there, the continued ask, I would say, is getting more access to real-world clinical studies in SDTM format, especially those that don't have kind of the challenges that were in the current mode, and being able to use that de-identified and kind of even public domain would be even better, the entire study package there. As always, probably with any working group, we're always asking for volunteers, especially those can help with some of the high-level concept mappings. Again, those with expertise on either end of the spectrum, SDTM or OMOP, would be highly welcomed. And if there are any organizations who are actually doing this currently, I would love to get in touch with them and understand their lessons learned and challenges that they're currently encountering, or even best practices maybe they came up with. So knowledge sharing is a big piece to this as well. So let me stop there if there's any questions.
Great, thank you, Mike. If you have questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. We will move on to Asiyah. She's going to talk about 2 work groups, but she'll start with the vaccine vocabulary.
Hi, for the OHDSI vaccine vocabulary working group, we started to reviving this group this year. The objective 1 is we want to build a consensus model for vaccines that will fit OHDSI's needs. The key result will be by the first quarter of this year, we should be coming up with comparison of the current models such as ARCS-norm, extensions, SNOMED, CVX, and the vaccine ontology. And then on that, we should be able to develop a consensus model with the current group. Go next. So the next one then will be after we decided those consensus model, we then leverage existing work to map different vaccine representations to this model. The key result will be we will be identify a methodology to achieve an accurate mapping, and then use that to establish vaccine term mapping for OMOP use. And then we will incorporate the mappings to the OMOP vocabulary that will hopefully be, while we're doing mapping, we want to do it in parallel. So while we do mapping, we start to look at how to incorporate those mapping to the OMOP vocabulary and evaluate them. And then eventually we could present to the OHDSI symposium. All right. So next, I report about the medical device working group. This working group, as I said last year in the symposium, that we are expanding the leadership team and establish collaborations across OHDSI and beyond. The one key result will be establish the subgroups and the leadership teams. So you will see later that we have, for some subgroups, we do have leaders and we do have objectives, but for some we are still vacant. We are looking for volunteers to lead the group. And then we have another task that is really critical, time sensitive, is that we want to respond to the FDA Medical Device Active Surveillance, RFI, by the March 30th. So I had sent out emails to reach out people to ask a time to set up a meeting this week. But if anybody else who felt that you want to contribute to this effort, please let me know. Oh, you might, if you don't have my email, you might just let Craig know and he can pass it to me. Then I'm thinking for this group, we are still small numbers and we really need to establish collaborations and brainstorming ideas. I'm thinking we need to, there are a couple of goals, object results in the later quarter is develop activities to establish collaborations, and then maybe thinking of planning a thinkathon or hackathon at the annual symposium. Next. Yeah, next will be device data subgroup. Anthony or Carrie, if you are on, please talk about your subgroup.
I'm here. I can discuss it.
Okay.
Carrie, are you with us?
I don't think so.
No. Okay. All right. So this is the device data subgroup, and the first objective is to enable the device standardization efforts to be interoperable with OMOP to support large-scale device data analysis. We'd really like to invite and welcome people with device data to map their data to the OMOP CDM, or at the very least join the working group calls and tell us why they don't want to or why they failed. And we'd love to be the touch point for them to answer questions or to help them with their mapping. So for our key results for Q2, the first is to explore the current OHDSI data sets for the device data coverage. Next, to explore and evaluate extending the OMOP CDM. There's some discussion about the whether or not the current CDM structure is not welcoming to people with device data, despite the fact that we have a device exposure table. So we'd love to invite people with device data to join our call and the CDM working group call to discuss if and in any way the current CDM is not in a format that's helpful for their current structure of their data. And finally, explore tools and methods to include device data into the OMOP vocabulary. That's it. Thanks.
Yeah, next will be Andrew to talk about another subgroup.
Yes, and just to give a little bit of a framework, we're talking about two different kinds of device data, maybe across these subgroups. So there's device identifier information that just says here's what people were exposed to, that you had this device implanted or this device was used in some way on you. And I think some of the other work that Anthony and others are looking at is mostly about that. This subgroup is about data that are generated from devices, waveforms, other kinds of high frequency data we might call numerics that come out of monitors in ICU or other parts of healthcare settings. And our goals are to develop the standard strategy for managing and representing those kinds of data. And that involves clarifying the extent to which we've got standard concepts for them in the vocabulary, developing a strategy for adding them where they don't exist, and then testing a previously developed strategy for mapping the data from those covered concepts based on stuff that we've done with this MIMIC data set, the wonderful freely available data from Beth Israel Deaconess that MIT has long curated and made available for free. It's been a source. So there's a mapping of MIMIC data to OMOP that we've been working on. And as a part of that work, we developed a strategy for taking waveform features or other device-generated data features and putting them in the CDM, and we'll be testing that out. And we're very excited about everybody who wants to join. This is I think, a pretty high value effort. There's a lot of really important information that you can get from these kinds of signals, and integrating them with the other kind of clinical data is a really exciting prospect. We hope many people join us.
Yes, so for the last group about device adverse event subgroup, the lead is still vacant. We are looking for the lead people who volunteer to lead this group and establish the group, identify the OKRs. And we have actually one activity that is related to this group. So hopefully the leaders will rise from there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Asiyah, for both presentations. Next up, Nigel Hughes for the Education Workgroup.
Hi, thank you very much, Craig. And on behalf of the Education Workgroup, great to give this update. So just firstly, before we talk about our OKRs, background and why we exist, our purpose. So really, we are wishing to support the community to address a learning curve from being a novice to mentors and everyone in between related to the OHDSI research framework, particularly focused on tools, skills, and methods utilized for quality observational research using OMOP CDM map data sets. And we're doing that through working on guidance, signposting, triaging, or alerting and directing colleagues to materials and collaboration, training and education resources and opportunities. And we really aim to support the community members through these relevant learning pathways, which are being developed over time now, and both externally, but also within the work group. We meet on the 4th Friday of the month, just in terms of some housekeeping there. So just in terms of our first OKR, and this is being led by Kristen Kostka, this is coming on from activity from last year. But just an aside, for our OKRs, we really wanted this year to look at much more tangible outputs that were clearly demonstrating impact actually for the OHDSI community. We were, I think, more forming last year, and I think it's more time to be a bit more tangible now. So in this first one, we really want to extend the glossary actually at the heart of OHDSI. So optimize the use and understanding of standardized terminologies within the OHDSI community. We've been updating a glossary of terms, really extending beyond the version that's in the book of OHDSI, and actually work to expand that, incept it into OHDSI, the Eden Academy, and various other resources online, and certainly ensure that it's well utilized and evaluate the promotion, the update, and of this glossary, and link that ultimately to a directory around OHDSI training providers and opportunities internationally and globally as well, because there's a lot going on, but it can be extremely difficult to navigate all of this. So there's some basic aspects of just what we talk about and the terms, and also what materials available as well, in terms of supporting people on that learning curve. And thanks to Kristen for volunteering to take the lead on this first OKR 1. And if we look at the next OKR 2, which logically follows, certainly really in the first half of this year, and apologies, OKR 1 is really aimed at the kind of first couple of quarters of this year, but particularly into early quarter 2. But OKR 2 is looking more at the first half of this year, around exposing again the training and education facilities within the OHDSI community, been led by Nagy, who has a particular focus in this area in his own role, at Johns Hopkins and elsewhere, but also within OHDSI. Really focus on the directory, as I mentioned, particularly through OHDSI and Eden Academy and so on. There's a typo there, it should be .ohdsi.org. And then really support the increase in uptake of materials and courses from directory providers. Linked to that is Paul's own interest in incorporating a lot of materials that are being developed within the OHDSI community, within Eden Academy, into pre-existing, for instance, postdoc and data science courses at Johns Hopkins, but also other institutions as well. And there's clearly a lot of interest from other organizations to emulate that. And then lastly, in OKR 3, led by myself, really focus on those learning pathways, as I mentioned. When you start out in the OHDSI community, like everything, can be very daunting and difficult to know how to start and what to focus on, and where best to use your limited resources. We have to remember that nearly all of us are doing a lot of this on top of the day job, and in the evenings and the weekends and so forth, with limited time for training, for instance. So we want to start with an initial draft basic learning pathway, particularly for novitiates, in terms of where do I start, where do I go, what resources are available, building on the glossary terms and the directory of training resources, but linking that also into actual training modules available in OHDSI, in the Eden Academy and so forth, so that people can have a navigatable path, which ultimately can lead them to specialize after that. And will be consistent for all that will join and be involved in the community going on from there. And we'll build other learning pathways on top of that as well. Thanks for the time. I should stop there. I think I really hit my limit, but thank you to everyone, colleagues of the Education Workgroup.
Great. Thank you, Nagy. Let's move to Davera with FHIR and OMOP.
Great, thank you, Craig. So really quickly, just want to say that we also developed a keyword theme for our working group for 2023, which is focus. So just to review, the work group purpose in 2023 is to work towards the objectives identified in the original 2021 agreement. And we're going to do this by developing and validating some standard transformations between the two models. We're hoping to do this to have two outcomes. One, to highlight the essential differences between the models, and then also provide the community guidance by reducing variability and increasing the quality of transformations out in the community, which then supports the broader OHDSI network objectives. Next slide, please. So there were 4 different subgroups, just as a review, we had 2 focused on infrastructure, and which was model harmonization, and 1 in vocabulary, and 2 in 2 different use cases of digital quality measurement and oncology. And I'm not going to read this whole slide, but we did much exploration and surfaced many transformation issues and approaches to transformation issues in the context of these 4 various subgroups. Just a couple of the big highlights for the activities thus far is there was participation in 2 FHIR Connect-a-thons, and shout out to the oncology work group and May Terry in particular, who led that effort. And then we also participated and convened what we thought was a very successful day-long workshop about the various work that we had done and exploration at the OHDSI Symposium in the fall. Next slide, please. So for 2023, we have our 3 objectives are as follows. We want to consolidate and pull together in a focused effort the work and explorations that were done up until this point by developing a draft specification with some special focus on OMOP 5.4 and FHIR R5. We don't want to replicate prior work that had been published in FHIR IGs, and so we're going to focus in those areas. We're also going to develop in a similar way a draft, a specification for input and further exploration for putting the OMOP vocabulary on a FHIR terminology server. And lastly, we're committing to participate or host at least 1 hands-on style meeting. We've got lots of things, lots of discussions in the works, which include virtual options on that hands-on style meeting, and also hackathon connect-a-thons that are convened outside the US. That's it for us.
Great, thank you so much, Davera. Paul.
Thank you, Craig. And so Jan and I lead the medical imaging working group. We've been doing this for just about a year now. And so we're really excited because we've had a lot of incredible medical imaging experts as part of our group and ontology experts from radiology, RSNA, from the DICOM standards, and from RADLEX. And next slide. And let's see, can you go?
Yeah.
There we go. So our goal is to really enable medical imaging with OHDSI research through both the images and the acquisition parameters, as well as the features that we derive from algorithms of those images. Next slide. And so, Craig, you can keep me on pace here by hitting spacebar every 5 seconds, or you can just go through the whole thing.
Went through
That's
them all.
fine too. So basically what we're doing is we're linking image studies to a DICOM archive, which is what most health systems have, which is a PACS or vendor neutral archive. We call this an image occurrence. This is going to be linked at the image series level. And then what we're going to be doing on the right-hand side is we're going to be using algorithms, desegmentation algorithms that can create image features that will maintain the provenance of where it creates new measurements into the OMOP model. We're going to be grouping those imaging features into imaging findings, which are clusters of features, and then we're going to be able to link them over time through the episode events table to look at things like a lung nodule tracking over time to see its doubling rate. So this is where we see, we actually feel like we have a reference implementation now, a reference model that we're moving forward with. So we're now at the stage of what we're moving into writing this paper up and beginning the reference implementation. So next slide. So our OKRs for this year are that we are now publishing our imaging extension. We are working with the vocabularies teams to incorporate RADLEX, which incorporates derivatives, or I guess extra concepts from SNOMED that are tied to clinical findings, as well as the DICOM vocabulary, which describes the image acquisition parameters of the imaging studies themselves. So we're working on vocabularies. And then for the second part of this year, we'll be implementing 2 reference implementations with really the goal is to conduct a network study, as well as an implementation guide of the conventions we've used for incorporating medical images into OHDSI research. And so this year will be very exciting because we hope to demonstrate how to do cohort discovery with both imaging and EHR outcomes, to demonstrate how we can track image feature provenance from machine learning algorithms, as well as how we combine EHR features as well as pixel features for model building and for how we can do a multi-institutional network study. And that is it.
Great. Thank you, Paul. New work group led by Alison Callahan, the Perinatal and Reproductive Health Group, which is Craig, which I loved. Alison.
Yeah. Hi. And actually, so the name is owed to Stephanie Leonard, who is also on the call and co-leads the group with me, along with Louisa Smith from Northeastern. So Stephanie and I are at Stanford, and Louisa is at Northeastern, and we are leading the Perinatal and Reproductive Health Group. So we're a new group. We had our first official meeting only in December, and we've had one in January, February, and our next is actually March 15th. The purpose of our group, we exist to develop tools and standards for perinatal and reproductive health research, to foster collaborative studies within the OHDSI network, and of course, to advance research in the field. I think I'd been aware for a while that there was pockets of OHDSI researchers who were doing really related things. And with Stephanie, we got excited about the idea of making this a formal group where we could bring those people together. And so we have 2 OKRs for 2023. The first is to improve capture and representation of pregnancy and reproductive health data in the OMOP CDM. So our first sub-activity there is to complete a landscape assessment of how different institutions, that is OHDSI sites, represent and organize pregnancy and reproductive health data writ large. That's sort of a big activity, but we're focusing first on specifically pregnancy and delivery data. And to produce a report that summarizes our group's consensus on what we think are best practices for structuring these data and doing perinatal and reproductive health research using multi-site data in the OMOP CDM. And then our second high-level OKR is to create a network of partners who are interested in doing perinatal and reproductive health research in OHDSI. And to that end, we aim in 2023 to conduct 10 group meetings that include representatives from at least 10 institutions on topics relevant to our first 2 OKRs. So far, we've had between 20 and 30 people on our calls, which has been wonderful. And to pilot an initial research project with at least 5 institutions. And our proposal for that project right now that network study is to look at antihypertensive medication usage in pregnancy. And this is very much related to research that Stephanie Leonard is doing. Our next call is March 15. It will be on parent-child linkage algorithms, and we'll have Jamie Weaver and others coming and presenting on projects related to that and a review that has been done on that space. So if you're interested in joining us,
Nope, you just got muted. I don't know what happened there.
oh, sorry, I think I hit spacebar. So if you're interested in joining this work group, come and email us or look at the page that Craig will add our info to. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Alison. Great to hear a new work group doing exciting work. Okay, last but not least for today, patient level prediction, Jenna.
So I'm just going to be talking about the PLP group, which doesn't have quite as cool a name as PREG, but maybe we can work on improving that at some point. So what our group does is generally we're trying to improve the process for developing prediction models and make sure that when people are doing prediction, they're applying best practices and they're getting good models out. So there's three main areas really that we're focusing on. One is the methods research to make sure that we know what the best practices are. The other is actually applying what we've learned for the best practices to actually get clinically meaningful models or validate existing ones to see how well they're doing. And then the third thing is to use the OHDSI network to actually run network studies. So these are the three different things that we're doing inside the group. And if you're interested in any of these or all of these, we have our next meeting on the 8th of March at 9 a.m. Eastern time, which hopefully should be suitable for most people around the world. So our first OKR was to actually get more face-to-face activity going on within the group. So we're going to have some meetings in the European and the global and the Asia Pacific symposiums. So we're going to have lots of different face-to-face meetings. So wherever you're based, if you go to one of the OHDSI symposiums, you should be able to get to meet people face-to-face. So that's our first one. The next one is we want to also create some benchmark problems. So to actually evaluate best practices and see how well different methodologies and design choices actually impact the prediction. We want to have lots of prediction tasks to actually investigate. So we decided that we're going to set some time aside during our work group meetings to actually discuss different tasks, prediction tasks of interest. And the aim is to identify, say, 5 to 10, maybe more, if we are successful during the year, prediction tasks of interest, and we can then benchmark that and actually add these models to a website that Ross Williams has been leading to actually store prediction models and make it easy for people to see how well they're doing and also download the models, called Delphi. So we want to add these models to Delphi, and then we can actually start doing benchmarking pretty well on those tasks. The next thing is we want to investigate learning models for rare outcomes. So often when you have rare outcomes, you don't have many outcomes. It's hard to learn the models in a data set if the outcome count is low. So we're looking at different approaches for this. One thing is a stacker ensemble where you could learn models in different data and then kind of learn the stacker in the small data set. Or you can do transfer learning, which is a similar process, learn a model in big data from a big database, and then you can fine tune it on a smaller data set. So we want to look at these methods and see how they compare, and also how they compare with just fitting the model in that small data set. So that's one investigation we're going to do this year. And then the next slide. We also want to look at external validation, understand it. So often when you apply a model to a new database, the performance is different to the performance internally. And there's lots of different reasons for this. And so we want to come up with tools to actually understand what's causing the increase or decrease in performance. Decrease is more common. And also we want to have tools that can perhaps estimate how well you're going to do externally just based on patient characteristics. So this will just give us a better feel for external validation. And then we also want to do some locally updating of models. So this is actually what we've realized is that a lot of the times we're fit a model and we do external validation, but we don't look at how well that does over time. And obviously the data changes, the healthcare system changes over time. So we want to look at getting tools into the package that will let us monitor this and investigate things over time and potentially update over time. So there's quite a lot of work we're going to be doing on locally updating models and seeing how they stand over time. And the next slide. So you can see we've got quite a lot of OKRs, so there's going to be plenty of areas of interest if you want to join us. And then the next thing is we want to also do stratify the risks. So this is more trying to personalize the risk estimates for drugs. And one of the things of this was something called counterfactual prediction. So could we actually predict what your risk of certain events would have been if you had taken a different drug than the one you had? So this task is aimed towards that. So it's kind of the intersection of prediction and causal inference. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done for that. So we want to do some methods research into that. And then the next slide, I think
that was your last one.
Okay, so that's all our OKRs. So yeah, if any of these seem interesting to you, it'd be good to see you on our meeting on March the 8th.